that gives us a simple formula for the socially optimal level of the non-price instrument. We set the number of people multiplied by their average marginal utility equal to the marginal cost of providing quality. So another way to put that is the per person cost of providing quality has to be, marginal cost of providing quality has to be equated to the marginal utility that people on average get, which makes sense, right? We're, as a society, trying to offset the marginal utility and the marginal cost, right? Okay. Now I want to take the derivative of profits with respect to the non-price instrument. Now profits, remember, are price times quantity minus cost, right? So Connor, oh yeah, Jacob?
Is it the average marginal utility of everyone, or just of the people on the boundary?
Just the people purchasing.
Okay.
So theta is the people who are purchasing. Partial theta is the people on the boundary. And I didn't give any notion of the people who aren't purchasing. That's a key question. OK. So what happens, Connor, if we take the derivative of the profits with respect to the non-price instrument, holding fixed the number of people that purchase? What would we get?
Well, if you hold fixed the n, then the only thing that will change is c.
And what about p?
Oh, p, but you're taking the derivative with respect to rho.
Yeah, but remember that we're letting p adjust so as to hold fixed n,
okay,
right?
So then it would be, yeah, it would be the derivative of it.
And remember, what did we say that was? How much does the price rise when we increase rho?
By the expected value
Yep.
times n or n?
No, it just rose, right? Here we just got that it rose by the expected marginal utility of the marginal consumers, the set of people in partial theta, right? So what would that give us here when we take the derivative of that?
Of CP.
Of these two terms here. So you said n is held fixed, and we just said what the derivative of p was, right?
Yeah.
So it's the average marginal utility of the marginals. And then we get c sub rho, right? Which is the derivative, partial derivative of cost with respect to rho. Yeah. So, sorry, this is wrong here. There should be expected marginal utility of the marginal people. So this gives us a different expression than the one up here for the optimal level of rho. David, Wayne?
Yeah.
What is the expression? Just solving this out in a way that's parallel to this.
I'm not sure.
Well, this has to be set equal to 0, right? This is the derivative of profits.
Right.
We're trying to figure out what the firm's optimal price level of non-price is. If we set this equal to 0, can you give it to me in a form that's just like that up there?
Right. So it's n times.
This should be the expected marginal.
Expected marginal.
Yeah.
Given.
Of the people who are on the margin.
Right.
Is equal to what?
C given the
C sub rho. So the marginal cost of providing more quality.
The difference is just the people on the margin instead of the people who are.
Exactly. Exactly. So that, Cheng-Yi, did you have a question?
So what's the intuition for setting the derivative of the profit over quality to 0?
Derivative of the profit to 0.
Yeah, but aren't we deriving it over?
We're trying to find what the firm does, right? What's optimal profit maximizing for the firm, right? So that's why we're doing it, right? Because we always set the derivative of profit with respect to whatever the firm's maximizing equal to 0, right? Okay, so these expressions are exactly the same, except that rather than taking into account the average marginal utility of average consumers, the firm takes into account the average marginal utility of the marginal consumers. Why is that? Well, when the firm increases its quality, it can only raise prices by what those marginal people are willing to pay for that quality. if the inframarginal people get more utility, it doesn't care, right? Because they're not changing anything in terms of their profits. Yeah,
So
Jacob.
the first one's giving you the socially optimal.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The second one is giving you the firm's privately optimal.
Exactly. So this is like comparing, marginal cost pricing to. Oh yeah, yeah. You can pick up your exams here.
Oh, no, I haven't taken
No, you're not taking it here.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So the average marginal utility. The firm doesn't internalize the benefits that it brings to the inframarginal consumers because it can't extract any more revenue from those guys, right? And that'll mean that quality will tend to be too high from a social perspective if the marginal people value quality more than the inframarginal people. And it will tend to be too low if the marginal people value quality less highly than the marginal. Yeah, go ahead.
If they were able to price discriminate, this would be fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. We will talk more about that. Yeah, exactly. Now, this can be offset by what is sometimes called voice, and we'll talk more about this later, which is that, if the inframarginal people, when you degrade the quality, sort of complain and otherwise make hell for the firm, right, that can reduce the firm's incentive to exploit them in this way, right? But that is sort of the intensive margin that we're going to bring in a moment. But you can get quite a few intuitions just out of this basic idea. So, in fact, most price discrimination has this basic logic behind it. You want to give subsidies to the people who are like, you just think you can attract in, and you want to sort of take money away from the people who are stuck buying the product. Yeah, go ahead, Chairman.
Like in real life, wouldn't the existing customers buy more of the product? They can't.
Well, yeah. So if there's repeat purchases and how much they like it affects whether they buy it again, then that will be an effect. So here we've got sort of like a one-time thing. You buy the product or you don't buy the product. That's it, right? Yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
And we're assuming that catering to the marginals won't sort of alienate the pre-existing customers, if you will.
Well, they're locked in.
Okay.
They're stuck,
So
right? So you don't care about screwing them. So you're trying to squeeze as much out of the inframarginals as you can without alienating the marginal consumers. So the classic example of this is treating differently people who are locked into buying a product versus people who have the choice to go do something else, right? So a classic example of that is that, if you've ever lived in a city where there's lots of tourists, you may notice that the city often caters to the tourists rather than to the people that are stuck living there. And in fact, this became very famous in Israel because there's all these efforts to try to attract people to come and live in Israel, and then it turned out not to be quite as good once you actually came to live there. So I don't know if anyone's ever gone on Birthright Israel, but they throw this giant party for you. They try to make it seem like Israel's the most fun place, but you talk to any Israeli and they'll be like, trust me, it's pretty tough once you come and actually live here. So there is a famous joke about this. So in this joke, David Ben-Gurion, the founder of the State of Israel, dies and goes up to God. And God says to him, you've been so good to my people, I'm going to let you choose whether you want to go to heaven or go to hell. And so he says, well, I've got to see both of them before I decide, right? And so he goes to hell, and there's all these beautiful women, and they're all dancing and drinking. It's like the Berlusconi administration. And then he goes up to heaven, and he, in a couple years, you guys are going to be too young. The equivalent of you is going to be too young to know who Berlusconi is. But at least for now, I can do this, right? So then he goes up to heaven, and they're talking about product design and the future of the State of Israel. It's like the Obama administration up there, right? And he says, look, I live such a sober life. I deserve some fun in the afterlife. I'm going to go to hell. And immediately they throw him onto the rack, they're waterboarding him, they're pulling out his toenails. Now it's like the Bush administration, right? And he asked Lucifer, I was having such a good time 5 minutes ago, what happened? And he said, well, then you were a tourist, right? So that's the Spence distortion in action, right? However, there are two things that discipline, as people were bringing up, firms' abilities to just exploit people in this way. The first is an intensive margin. People may not buy as much or participate as much if they don't like the place. So Israel might have to worry about the fact that people are going to be bad soldiers or something like that if they hate living in the country, right? And second, you might attract the wrong sorts of people. So if you change what it's like to live in the country in the right way, people might come, but only really poor people or people who aren't very well educated, who you don't necessarily value as much having in your country. Okay, so these two effects are the Musa-Rosen and Vega-Weyl effects, and we'll turn to these a little bit later. But first I want to apply some of Spence's logic. But keep in mind that for each of these applications, you can think about these intensive and extensive sorting effects potentially mitigating some of the analysis. Okay. So one very simple example of this was given by Hotelling. So Hotelling considered a case where there was a product characteristic that could be anywhere between 0 and 1. And he imagined that consumers live at different points along the line between 0 and 1, and they have to pay a cost in order to go and buy the product somewhere that's far away from where they live, right? So in fact, they pay a cost of t times the different distance between them and the product in order to travel to the store at point J. Okay. This is a classic example of a horizontal product characteristic. Because if I move in one direction, I move closer to some consumers, but further away from others, right? All consumers buy one product or the other product. So technically, this isn't really a monopoly. This is a competitive situation. But the logic is quite similar to what happens under monopoly. Okay. So to think about this, imagine we hold fixed the firm's prices, and they're the same or something like that. And that the firms are at 2 points, row 1 and row 2. Now, Matt Klein, if the firms now have the chance to move, where are they going to move?
Well, they want to attract the most customers.
Yeah.
So they'll move to the middle.
Why are they going to move to the middle from Spence's logic?
Right, because if they're both at the socially optimal place, which
Yep.
is maybe a third or a fourth and 3/4,
Mm-hmm.
then the customers right in the middle are indifferent between the two.
Yeah.
So by moving towards those indifferent customers, they reduce the cost of going to that store.
Exactly. They're catering to those marginal customers, and the marginal customer is halfway in between the two of them, right? Okay. So, so you move towards your competitor. And this holds at every point, right? No matter where they are, not even at the social opposite points, no matter where they are, the marginal customer is always halfway in between. So they always move towards each other until they wind up on top of each other, right? Now, this spot has to be in exactly the center. What would happen if it wasn't exactly in the center? Well, imagine that it was sort of, here's sort of the picture. Imagine that they ended up at this point, right? Well, then someone could just move over here and get all the people that are on that side and half of the people in between, right? And so they wouldn't want to be exactly on this point, right? So they've got to end up exactly in the center. Now, that's only true if people are sort of uniformly all over the line. If people were in different places, instead, where they would have to be is at the point where half of the people were on one side and half of the people were on the other side, right? So that leads to a very simple extreme prediction. George? Where's George? Okay. Anyway, it's pretty obvious. The prediction is that, okay, we're going to derive it. Okay, so what is the marginal value that